Burlington, Vermont. Late afternoon. The sky was covered with heavy clouds, and daylight was beginning to descend like an opaque veil over the neighborhood's ancient roofs. The trees swayed slowly, rocked by a damp wind, carrying the smell of the first dry leaves of autumn. The garden at the back of a wooden house, already worn out by time, seemed suspended in silence. It was the kind of silence that doesn't bring peace, but the strange feeling that something is about to happen. The leaves on the ground moved on their own, sliding as if fleeing from something invisible. That was when a different sound cut through the air, a muffled, insistent sound. Someone, or something, was moving the wet earth with effort. In one of the corners of the yard, almost hidden among the twisted roots of an ancient tree, a cat was hurriedly digging the soil. Its paws dug into the earth with precision, pulling up small, dark mounds with each movement. He didn't seem to be joking. He seemed to be searching or hide. The animal suddenly stopped. He raised his head slowly, his golden eyes shining even in the dim light. He remained motionless for a few seconds, in silence. And then he looked directly at a point beyond our reach, as if he realized he was no longer alone. Someone's breathing became faster. There was someone watching, but it was not possible to see who. Neither the cat moved nor time. Just the weight of that moment, hovering between what is visible and what is not. Before anything was revealed, the scene was plunged into darkness. It was just another afternoon in Burlington, one more among many others that were lost in time. But that day, something changed. Something that had been buried, much longer than anyone could imagine, decided to return. And it all started with that sound in the garden. Something was being buried, but it wasn't a toy, and that cat was no ordinary cat. Have you ever had that feeling that something was watching you, even without seeing anything? Comment below. Helen Carter had lived in the same house for almost 40 years. It was an old building. The house had belonged to her parents, then her husband, and now it was hers alone. But it didn't feel like home. No more. Since Thomas's death, everything there has become quieter. Not the comfortable kind of silence, but the kind of silence that weighs heavily, that accumulates in the corners like dust on forgotten furniture. The mornings were always the same. The sound of the heater turning on by itself, the kettle whistling for coffee that was getting cold before it was even drunk, and the sound of her footsteps echoing through the rooms as if she was trying to fill the void with her own presence. In the center of the room, a dark wooden shelf held the most intimate objects from her life. Books that the two used to read together, small souvenirs from trips made decades ago, and a silver frame, slightly oxidized, with a photo of the two smiling. Helen looked at that image every day. Time had faded the colors a little, but not the feelings. The longing remained intact. Sometimes she would sit in the armchair next to the window and watch the yard. It was the same scenario as always, but I never stopped expecting something. A sign, perhaps, an unexpected move, a coincidence that made her believe that time had not taken everything away. Thomas used to tend the garden. He took special care of the rose bushes and liked to plant aromatic herbs near the balcony. Since he was gone, Helen has let nature take over. The plants grew freely, a little disorganized, as if reflecting her own emotional state. The pain was silent but constant. She didn't talk about it with anyone. Friendships grew distant over time, and neighbors, although kind, were nothing more than distant waves on the street. Helen lived between memories and routines. It was a kind of emotional survival, not allowing anything new to enter, so as not to run the risk of losing it again. Inside that house, time seemed immobile. Each room held a piece of something that once was, and with each step, she felt like she was walking inside a memory. Helen no longer counted the days. Ever since Thomas was gone, time seemed frozen in that house. Everything there still smelled like him, but nothing filled the void. Do you also have a corner of the house that holds difficult memories? The next morning, Helen was in the kitchen making tea when she noticed movement in the garden. On instinct, he turned towards the window, and there, standing among the fallen leaves, was he, a thin cat, its fur slightly ruffled by the wind, and with intense golden eyes almost impossible to ignore. He didn't make a sound. He just watched. Her, directly, firm, as if I knew her. She stood still, not knowing what to think. The animal remained there for a few seconds, and then disappeared into the bushes, as if it had never been there. Helen wondered if she should worry. But for some reason, he didn't feel afraid. Just strange. A strangeness that echoed deep inside, as if something dormant inside her had awakened for an instant. The next day he was there again. Same place, same look. It didn't advance. He didn't hide. He just watched her, as if waiting for an answer. Helen began to wait for him, without even admitting it. Every morning, she opened the curtain with her heart a little more anxious, as if the animal's presence meant something she didn't yet understand. At night, when the house fell silent, small sounds began to emerge from outside, as if something lightly scratched the wood of the porch. Other times, the noise came from the earth being disturbed. The old exterior lights flickered randomly, as if something was interfering with them. Whenever Helen opened the door, the garden was empty. No sign of the cat, no sound. Just the wind and the trees swaying under the dark sky. Then objects started to appear. The first time, it was an old button, left right on the back door carpet. The next day, a small blue ribbon stained by time. Then a silver ring with the initials TC engraved inside. Helen froze when she recognized her. It was Thomas's ring, the one he had lost the autumn before he died. They never found it again. She looked around, trying to understand. There were no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. Only the cat, standing in the same corner of the garden, watching with fixed eyes, as if he knew what that meant. It wasn't just any stray cat. He didn't look hungry, not lost. There was something in his eyes, a presence, a consciousness, a calm that did not match the animal world. He seemed to know exactly what Helen felt, and more than that. It felt like I'd seen her before. Helen wasn't sure when she started waiting for the cat, but as the days went by, he started to notice the garden more. Her eyes swept every corner, attentive, even when she pretended to be busy with other things. She told herself it was just curiosity, but deep down there was already a silent connection there, an inexplicable bond, built in the look of that animal that seemed to understand what she wasn't saying out loud. However, along with the strange company came fears. I'm afraid I'm getting confused. Fear of projecting feelings that could never come back. Fear of making space for something she couldn't understand. Instinct told us to close the door, keep the stranger away, protect ourselves. But the heart asked for the opposite. The conflict within her became more evident each night. At times, Helen almost called the cat to come in. He even left the door ajar as a gesture of surrender, but soon after it locked again. I was afraid that it was all a nostalgia trap, a cruel illusion of a lonely mind that wanted to believe in signs where there was only coincidence. That was when, one sleepless night, she went up to the attic in search of something to distract her. Looking through old boxes, he found an album of old photographs. When he opened it, the first image that came to his eyes was that of Thomas, smiling next to a cat. The same look, the same coat, even the same small white streak on the front paw. A shiver ran down Helen's spine. She turned the pages with shaking hands, her heart racing. There he was again, sitting on the porch, sleeping on Thomas's lap, watching through the window, just like now. This cat had disappeared shortly before her husband's death. Thomas looked for him for weeks, put up posters, asked every neighbor. And then one day he just gave up looking. At the time, Helen didn't understand why it shook him so much. Now, everything seemed to make too much sense, or no sense at all. Was it a coincidence, or had the same cat returned? Helen began to question herself, doubting your own lucidity. Could I be imagining things? Was it just a similar animal, and his mind, guided by pain, was building bridges with the past? Or was there something more? Something she couldn't explain but felt with frightening clarity. That night, Helen couldn't sleep. He walked through the dark house as if he were going through his own thoughts. With each step, I felt the presence of the past weighing more heavily. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, every shadow seemed to ask if she was ready. Ready to remember. Ready to feel. Ready to open the door. It was just an animal. But why did he bring back memories that she had tried to forget for so long? The fear of opening the door was the same fear of reopening old wounds. Night fell heavily over Burlington. The sky seemed darker than normal, as if announcing something that didn't yet have a name. Inside the house, Helen tried to distract herself with an old book, but her eyes couldn't follow the words. The image of the cat digging near the tree never left her head. In the last few days, his behaviors have become more intense. He always seemed to be searching for something, digging the same spot insistently. She watched him from the window, like someone watching a riddle unfold in silence. That night, however, something inside her broke, a mix of anguish, curiosity, and intuition. She put down the book, put on her boots, grabbed a flashlight, and walked out the back door without thinking much. The air was cold, and the ground was still damp from the previous day's rain. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for. She just knew she needed to see it for herself. The cat was there, standing at the edge of the ancient tree, looking directly at it. He didn't run, he didn't move away. When Helen took the first step, he slowly turned and walked towards the spot where he always dug. He stopped there, sat down, and watched as she approached. The wind lightly shook the leaves. The only thing that moved was the flashlight in his trembling hand. Helen knelt down with some difficulty. The floor was cold and soft. She hesitated for a second, but then started digging with her hands. Each handful of dirt removed brought a new layer of anxiety. His heart beat faster, as if he knew something was about to happen, until the fingers touched something different, paper, an envelope. She pulled it out carefully. It was dirty but intact. The aged paper, with edges yellowed by age, had her name written in handwriting. Helen felt breathless. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Thomas. She stood still, not knowing if she should open it right there. The weight of that envelope in my hands was almost physical. It was like holding onto a part of a time she believed was lost forever. His eyes filled with water, and the only thing he could do was clutch the envelope to his chest. The cat was no longer there. It had disappeared again. But at that moment, she didn't feel alone. For the first time in a long time, there was something stronger than silence. There, in the dark, with her fingers covered in dirt and her heart almost stopping, Helen held something impossible. A letter that should never have been found. As soon as he entered the house, with the envelope in his hands, he sat down at the kitchen table, still covered in dirt, his heart beating as if every second was a leap in the dark. The envelope was damp around the edges, and the letters of her name, even though worn by time, still bore the unmistakable trace of Thomas. She ran her fingers over the handwriting as if she could touch his presence once again. Carefully, he opened the envelope. Inside, there was a single sheet handwritten in slightly faded blue ink. The lyrics were firm, but carried the weight of someone who writes in a hurry and with emotion. Thomas had written that letter days before he died, and everything he couldn't say in life was there. He started by apologizing for not being able to be strong enough to talk to her. She said that she had known about the seriousness of the disease for longer than she had admitted, but she didn't want to burden her. He said he preferred to leave her with the good times instead of dragging her down with the fear of the end. I recognized that this decision may have been selfish, but deep down it was out of love. In the final part of the letter, he talked about the cat. It said that in its last days the animal seemed restless. He watched Helen from afar, as if he knew what was coming, and that, in one of his last conversations with his own silence, Thomas wrote, "If one day he comes back, listen to what he tries to show you, because I may not be able to, but he can guide you back to what is alive." Helen couldn't hold back her tears. He cried right there, his letter shaking between his fingers. The sound of emotion finally filled that space that had been silent for so long. She leaned her forehead against the table, letting the old pain come out in waves, and then he felt it, a soft, warm, silent presence. When he looked up, the cat was standing next to him. No sound, no scares, just him there, looking at her with that deep calm. After so many days, he approached for the first time. He slowly climbed onto his lap and lay down, as if it had been part of their routine for years. Helen welcomed him. He stroked its soft fur, and the silence changed. For the first time since Thomas's death, that silence wasn't empty. It was full of something new, something old, something she couldn't explain and didn't need to. There in that kitchen, with the letter on the table and the cat in her lap, Helen understood. The past doesn't come back, but sometimes it leaves signs, presences, little messengers that cross time, just to say that love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. The garden, which previously seemed like an abandoned place, became sacred. Every leaf, every flower, every root, everything seemed to have been a witness to something Helen had finally been able to feel again. Connection. True. Life. What separates the real from the inexplicable is not always logic. Sometimes it's love that insists on coming back in other forms. Have you ever been saved by someone, even without realizing it at the time? Time passed, but something about Helen had changed. The mornings were still silent, the coffee was still cold on the table, but now there were 2 cups, one for her and a small bowl next to it with warm milk for the new routine companion. She named him Midnight, the same name as the cat she and Thomas had so many years ago, the same cat that one day simply disappeared. Now, here he was. Or someone who brought exactly the same presence, the same lightness in their steps, the same peace in their eyes. Helen no longer tried to understand. I just felt it. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Walks in the garden are once again part of their days. She began cleaning the beds, replanting Thomas's favorite flowers, tending to the herbs he liked to smell in the late afternoon. Nature seemed to respond. The green returned little by little, as if her every gesture was received by the ground. With gratitude, the room she had kept locked since he left was also opened. The sun came through the windows that had been closed for years. The dust flew, and along with it some memories also found their way out. Helen started writing again. Small texts, letters that would never be sent, stories that were born between tears and smiles. The void still existed, but it was no longer the same. Now there was room for something new, for the mystery that doesn't need to be solved, just felt, for the love that doesn't need presence to exist, for the pain that transforms, over time, into something softer, more bearable, more beautiful. She knew that on some impossible-to-explain level, Thomas was there. Not like before, but in a way that only those who have loved deeply can recognize. Helen now lived, and that was all he would have wanted. Grief doesn't disappear. But it can transform, and sometimes all we need is an unexpected sign, even if it comes in the form of silent pause and eyes that see the soul. If this story moved you, comment below, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who needs to believe again.